Hello everybody, welcome to Ship Nuggets. Thanks for joining me today. How you doing? I hope you're doing awesome. And in light of everything that has been going on for the last 2 weeks, I want to talk about race or racism and followership. And you may be asking or wondering, Omo, why are you talking about racism and why are you linking it up with followership? Well, the reason why I'm doing this is because of the negative impact that racism has in society today. We all know what's been going on the last 2 weeks. We all know the protests that have been going on and the riots that have led from that. And not to take away from the real reason the protesters were protesting. The real reason they're protesting is because of racism within the perceived racism within the police force in the United States. And so many people have talked and they're talking about it. Great people, intelligent people, smart people have been sharing their views about the situation. And I just wanted to come at it from a different perspective, hence the topic, racism and followership. Why followership instead of this leadership? Well, I believe that leadership, the result of leading is following. In other words, there's no leading without following. If people are not there to carry out the bidding of the leader, then that leader is really not a leader. So I like to always kind of do things in the reverse, because the people who are actually on the streets, the people who are actually responding, are just everyday people. Of course, leaders are responding as well, but mostly it's everyday people who are responding. Mostly it's everyday people who feel the effects of racism. Mostly it's everyday people who feel the impact of racism, in their lives. So that's why I wanted to do a video on racism and followership and how racism affects a follower, how it affects the mindset of the follower. So the first thing I want to do is define racism. And racism is just a belief or a perception that race determines the traits and the behaviors of people, and that those traits that have come as a result of race are able to differentiate a race from another, or in essence, the traits or that are possessed by certain race puts them in a position of superiority above another race. So racism is a belief that my color, my skin tone, or the color of my skin determines my capacity, determines how far I'll go in life. It determines the opportunities that I'm going to get in life. The color of my skin also shows me to possess certain traits, certain behaviors that make me superior to another person. And the reality is that the racism is a very sensitive subject, very, very sensitive subject. And I know that this will garner a lot of response here. So that's that sense, that belief that because of my skin tone, I have qualities, I have characteristics, I have behaviors that make me or make somebody else superior to another person. So I want to say this right off the bat, that having this mindset is bad. Racism is bad. I'm not condoning it in any shape or form. To be racist is evil, is bad. That's not the original intent of God, I believe, and that's not God's plan for people to be racist. But over time, people acquire these beliefs, because I don't believe anyone is born racist. You look at kids playing in the playground, they're all playing with their friends who are of different races. They don't care about race. They don't see skin color, because that's not how they came into the world. But over time, they begin to acquire certain belief systems based on their environment, based on their upbringing, based on things they see, the people that they kind of hang out with, begin to acquire some of these things, and it begins to frame and form who they become. Now, followership is the willingness or the capacity to follow someone, or the willingness or the capacity to be influenced by someone or something or a cause or a vision. So the way we see ourselves in relation to the next person determines how we lead them, determines how we follow them, determines how we connect with them. So if I have a sense or a belief that because of my race I'm superior to my colleague, then it's going to affect the way I relate with them. If I have a sense that because of my race I'm superior to my boss, then I'm going to relate with my boss differently because of this racism that I have adopted over time. So I want to just highlight some things directly that racism, how the impact that racism has on followership. Number one, it influences our response. If I'm racist, the way I respond to people from a different race who lead me, it's going to be different. And I've had several stories of this, from women in corporate America, female black leaders who lead white men and women and have kind of complained about a pushback in some cases where the white men are like, no, you can't be my boss. I know I'm better than you. And these things come out, overtly or covertly. And that's because the racial perception has overflowed into the workplace, where a follower who is in a lower position than somebody in a different race, right? And that person is reacting a certain way. That response is different because of their perception of the person's race. Being racist influences our motivations, right? Because when there's racism, in a follower, it causes that follower to be blindsided by racism. You have blind spots. You only see things through the lens of race, and that limits how effective you'll be in an organization. If all you're seeing is your superiority over your colleagues, your superiority over your leaders, or your inferiority for that matter, it will affect your productivity in the long run. Why? Because you'll be blindsided. You only see things from the perspective of race, and that may not, be to your advantage. Another part to that in terms of motivation is that if I feel like there's a sense in me that I'm inferior in some way, I'm not going to be motivated to do anything. That's why we must all realize that God created us to be equal. We should not feel, it's easier said than done, but we need to remind ourselves that we are created, in the image of God, and we are equal, and no race is better. And so that should motivate us to go for that position or to continue to march on, because there's a higher ground of equality that God has called us to do. Another thing is that racism, having a racial bias or being racist affects our connectivities as followers. Many times when people see themselves, or when followers see themselves superior to their colleagues, they will not be able to connect with those colleagues. Another thing there is, you will limit the capacity of your leaders. Just because somebody's from a particular race, and because you feel they're inferior to you, you begin to question the capacity of their leaders. I know many times when people find out, like, in some certain settings, when they found out my race, even though I was leading certain things, they began to question, is this guy knowledgeable? Is he able to do it? Why? Because I was black. I didn't feel I had the capacity to do what I was called to do, because they felt superior to me because of the color of their skin. I'm calling a spade a spade. Another thing is loyalty. Because they have a difference. There's a difference in race. The loyalty levels were low because I can't be loyal to this person. I'm more superior to you. So these are just some things that, some things that affect, followership, or some ways that racism affects followership. And my final charge to us is this. We all have, things that we've borrowed from our culture, things that biases and cultures and different things. But I think that we should never get to the point where we feel like we are superior to the next person. All have been created in the image of God, and everybody has a chance to be all God has called them to be. Now, racism puts a damper to that chance because there's a limitation in the mind to the victims of racism, and then there's also systemic limitations as well. But I'm just encouraging you to rise above this. I'm encouraging you to see yourself as someone that God has created to make a difference wherever you are. And if you come from a background of racism where these racial things have been fed into your mind, I want you to just use this opportunity right now to ask questions. Ask the right questions, because not everything that has been fed to you from your environment or from your childhood is actually good for you. I think you should question. I'm very happy that a lot of people are beginning to ask questions about their complacency and kind of just their enablement by not asking, why are we so racist? Why do I have this air of superiority about me? And why is it affecting how I follow, how I work with people, how I relate with people? So I think asking good questions is great. Then doing some more research, digging deep and finding out, like, what's this about? Why are we the way we are? Where did we get this notion from of racism? And how can I, see my colleagues, see my leaders as fellow human beings that have issues like I have, that have pains, that have struggles like I have, and how can I work to help them, to encourage them, to empower them? What can I do to be of service to them? I think that when we do these things, it will help us to navigate through this. So that's all I have for now. I will be posting the other videos down the road. Until we see again, let's keep sailing to the top.